Out of all the pending Mets free agents, there is nobody that compares to the amount of level of Jacob deGrom. It's been looming over our heads for a long time about his potential opt-out, which he expressed that he will be exercising after this season. This has definitely become a controversial topic. With his recent injury history, it's definitely come into question whether the Mets can trust Jacob deGrom, or what type of situation do they want to put themselves in long term. There's been some sources and expectation that Jacob deGrom will be probably looking into the $50 million AAV range. His talent is definitely worth that value, but the pros and cons are definitely there for the Mets if they'd like to retain him in free agency. We're going to weigh those out with the burning question of whether the Mets should give Jacob deGrom $50 million this offseason.
On 3-2, Vader swings and misses, strike three. He struck him out. 5 Met pitchers combined for the second no-hitter in New York Mets history.
Now, I know that the two of us have completely different opinions on how the Mets should approach this offseason. Let me ask you this straight up. Is there any circumstance as to if you would give Jacob deGrom a $50 million AAV contract?
Yes, but I do not think Jacob deGrom will go for it. The only way I think the Mets would give him the $50 million AAV is if there is a massive clause in that contract where, hey, you can get the $50 million, but you got to hit me at least 150 innings pitched this year. I need 25 starts made. Like I said in my video, which the Mets do not need one starter. They need a whole rotation's worth of starting pitchers. If they were built like the Dodgers and had the luxury of they can pick up Zach Davies and turn him into a 20-game winner with a sub-2.5 ERA consistently, then yeah, you have the ability to pay $50 million to Jacob deGrom to be the ace of his staff, to be the best pitcher in baseball, whatever. But the Mets aren't in that luxury. The Mets cannot develop pitching, and they don't have any pitching prospects coming as a win-now team. Have no depth. They have no prospects unless you guys want to see David Peterson, which is crazy enough. Most of you people want to sit through David Peterson starts. Me, myself, and Mets fans do not. Money is the thing that Jake's talking about. Cohen will do whatever it takes. If he just wants to leave for personal reasons, there's nothing more the Mets could do. I hope there's a plan if they do that the rest of that rotation is not like, oh, it's a bunch of like Sean Manaeas. And, if Sean Manaea is my 5, okay. If Sean Manaea is my number 3 starter, and then we're talking the point of it's a lot of payroll into a starting rotation. I just think it's better. There's better ways to use that $50 million than pay the best pitcher in base. You got to build a team. And if you look at the playoff teams, they have their ace and then a bunch of quality.
I think the main focus of depth and asset management is definitely one of those concerns. And I think it's one of those carrying narratives that you see of how far will Steve Cohen want to go? Is he going to go for a $300 million payroll? Is he going to go for a possibly $400 million payroll? Does he want to win now so desperately that maybe he would not mind damaging that kind of draft pick compensation that would probably lower with going over that Cohen tax? We don't really know. And a lot of that starts with Jacob deGrom, who is going to get paid a lot, whether it's here or somewhere else. And let me ask you this from the GM standpoint. How far do you think Steve Cohen would have to go in order to keep Jacob deGrom and also build a quality rotation around him?
You're looking at last year's number. Their payroll was around $280 million. And that's when Jake making $32 million or whatever it was. Obviously, Scherz making $43. You look at their rotation 3, 4, and 5. You're taking $30 million off it with Bassett, Carrasco, and Walker. 20 of that million would go to Jacob deGrom. So you've got $10 million before you need a 3, 4, and 5 star. So you would probably have to go into $360 million payroll. Plus, you need a center fielder. If Nemo is back, a whole entire bullpen. Would you like a new DH? So you're pushing close to that $400 million threshold if Jacob deGrom were given $50 million. Maybe the Mets are active in the trade market, which Billy Epler's already kind of hinted at. Like, yeah, we're going to be active in free agency, but we're also going to be pretty active in the trade market, which that could help the Mets if you find a way. Let's say, throw a random name out there that has had some MLB Network news. Corbin Burns. Let's just say Corbin Burns was available. The Mets are going to go out. He's got 2 years left of arbitration, this year and next year, and then he's a free agent. But then you're also trading probably a Mauricio, maybe a Beatty in that trade. You're hurting your prospect cap. Where you look at the free agent class for pitchers, it's very old at the top. Kershaw, Wainwright, we're both probably going to retire. Justin Verlander, Jacob deGrom. And then you've got like Carlos Rodon. And then after Rodon, you have a lot of just Chris Bassett types like threes or really low-end twos. Nathan Eovaldi, your Shamaniza, Clevenger, guys like that. Those guys aren't going to cost you $25 million, maybe 16, 17. In Aya's case, maybe 10 to 12. You pay Jake, you're going to have to spend probably another 40 to 50 just to finish your rotation.
I think one of the counteractions that go on with that whole point is the fact that all of the long-term contracts, minus Lindor with the Mets payroll, they're all going to be gone in 2-3 years. And that opens up a lot of possibility of actually trading tradable assets for actual starting pitching and then extending them after all of those major contracts are gone. Now, if I am the Mets, I am personally going to go after Jacob deGrom, and I'm going to try and re-sign him. The depth is the only thing that you're going to have to look to in the minor leagues, minor league contracts, stuff like that. It does put you in a lot of limitations signing Jacob deGrom. But how I see it is it's a short-term limitation of signing Jacob deGrom. I understand they want to win and win big right now, but I think that if you do piece this together, you could. The only question is Epler going to think that it's enough? And that's definitely one of the main concerns that we've had past the offseason with depth. Now, we all know another negative effect, the recent injury history, definitely concerning with him getting older. As for the current taste in everybody's mouth right now, it's definitely a divided spectrum. You want Jacob deGrom back, you think Jacob deGrom is on the decline, and you don't want him back, and he's just going to cost way too much money. How I look at it is this: the value and the volume that he brings is worth almost 162 games every 5 days. This is a one-of-a-kind pitcher. The 2 rough starts towards the end, which I know with how good Jacob deGrom is with adjustment, it definitely does not define him. I think he's going to be the same Jacob deGrom if you bring him back. The thing is that he's worth $50 million when he's healthy. But during the actual condition, is it full on worth it short term for the next 2, 3, maybe even 4 years?
With how fragile these guys are, it's a concern in paying in a starting pitcher. The problem is he going to be able to make starts? Because the last 2 years, he's not been dependable. We thought in spring training, it'll be a couple weeks. Okay, he'll be ready at the end of April, early May. Okay. And then we didn't see him until after the All-Star. And also the other thing, which me and you picked up on, the pinpoint accuracy is starting to fade a little bit. He's not dominating that outside corner like he always does to set up the slider. And the slider hasn't been as sharp. It was better in the playoff game than Oakland and the Braves start. So you think he can be a pitcher once the velocity goes? He hasn't been able to show you like he trusts the curveball enough. He trusts his changeup enough, where he's kind of a 2-pitch pitcher. If one of those pitches diminishes, what is he?
I personally think with his ability, there's not really much that comes into question for me. The changeup is one of the best changeups in all of baseball. The curveball is actually one of the best curveballs in all of baseball as well. He's talked about developing himself into one of these 4-pitch type of pitchers. And I think that's something that you're definitely going to start to see towards the end of his career, whether it's here or somewhere else. That's something that I'm not concerned about. And I think that a lot of people are basing a lot of the injury history as to why he's not dependable. One of the main things that we know about Jacob deGrom is that he knows his body better than anybody else. As someone who likes to study of how he has perfected so many things over the years, deGrom made a lot of adjustments in between that time from his last injury to now. If you were to see some of the concern of velocity and the type of mechanics that he has made a tweak to, you can definitely see a small vertical adjustment. And that was mainly because he wants to stay healthy. And you can definitely see that if you're just going to be a classic type of baseball fan, look at Baseball Savant and see that his extension is down. That was done on purpose. Maintain the velocity, take a little bit of it off, and then kind of gradually turn into one of those 4-pitch pitchers. That I am not worried about at all. The only problem is with him getting older, there will be a lot of adjustments that he's going to have to make, whether it's health or whether it's mechanically, he's going to have to make those adjustments. And even though he's been known to make quick ones, whether it's between starts, between innings or whatever, we don't know how quick it is going to be for him to adjust it given his age. That's the main concern with Jacob deGrom. This is where I think having Max there is one of the big benefits. A guy who likes to save his velocity for when he actually needs it. The thing about Jacob deGrom is that the rest of his repertoire is so elite and so top tier that I'm not worried about that whole situation. It's only the adjustments that get harder with age. And hopefully Max Scherzer is one of those guys that helps him out through that. Still have 100, 101 in the tank, work the curveball, work the changeup, and still dominate just as ever. And that's what I think that you're going to start to see with a more older Jacob deGrom, being the old Jacob deGrom when he needs to be, but also being a 4-pitch pitcher with elite weapons. Now, with those conditions in mind, I came up with an ideal offer of what I would give to Jacob deGrom. And this is something that I thought of with the consideration of how this team is set up in this 2 to 3 year time frame, where as they continue to try and develop talent in the minor leagues and also move around assets and build a sustainable future, they still have the ability to go all out in this frame where they have Max Scherzer and where they have Starling Marte for the next 3 years. And that's the frame that I'm looking at right now. So as for this contract that I would give him, total value of $140 million over 3 years. Year one would be $44 million guaranteed. It would be more than what Scherzer is getting by a few $100,000. Year two becomes a player option that's worth $48 million if he pitches 120 innings in year one. Year three, it's a mutual option for $48 million. And it also gives him $5 to $7 million of additional incentives. And that is where the additional money you can pay him when a lot of all these short-term contracts come off the books.
I would kind of do that the same way. I would give him the Scherzer. I'd give him 2 hard years and then give him that, like, hit up free agency in the 3rd year when Max is free agency. And you're the highest paid pitcher those last 2 years. But making them options is interesting because it's like you get more this year, but you get that big money and like backloading it a la James Cann's contract where it's like, hey, come on, James, you get more money when you're even worse. I like having the mutual option the 3rd year, give Jake the power the 2nd year. I can think that's a good idea because it's like, hey, here's $48 million. You're really going to say no to that? Starts to decline. It gives you the escape hatch for the Mets in that year, 3rd year. That would be up to him for if he wants a geographic change of scenery, but if it's just the money, that's kind of perfect. That's a perfect offer. If he wants to take the most money and that's the most money, come on down.
I wouldn't say that I'm really concerned with the $50 million AAV. I think that if you were to structure it as to where he'd make more towards the end, but you also have some control over it, I think that's one of the insurance policies that the Mets definitely see as a benefit, and hopefully Jacob deGrom also sees. I think that you can definitely arrange the numbers to maybe you make it $148 million. I think the main question is whether the Mets or Jacob deGrom are okay mutually having those options with which side has the leverage. Now, we don't know what Jake prefers. Maybe he just plain out doesn't want to play for the Mets anymore. Maybe he wants to leave. But for what we know right now, we haven't heard anything directly come out of Jacob deGrom's mouth. We've heard some sources near him, some sources away from him, some sources outside the sources next to him, and the sources in the camp and the source against the source. So we don't know what he is currently thinking. Doesn't really say much. He just goes out there and pitches. I think it all has to do with leverage in this situation. What does Jacob deGrom want? I don't really have concern with what he produces as a pitcher. I think that he's going to be just as productive as he has been for the next few years. It all depends on what Jacob deGrom wants.